The prototype. Every toy company has a prototype. That first rough draft sitting in a warehouse somewhere, a little janky, a little embarrassing, and just best forgotten. But Playtime Company's prototype decided he had no intention of being forgotten. Experiment 1006, also known as the prototype, is the main villain of the entire Poppy Playtime story. A towering cyborg assembled from the spare parts of dead toys, factory scrap metal, a jester costume, a cracked porcelain mask, and what appear to be human bones visibly wired into his arms. He's the largest experiment ever made, but moves with incredible efficiency. He has spider-like legs that can punch through solid concrete, all while wearing the wide, fixed grin like that of a troubled child at the playground that nobody wants to play with. But what's clever about how the game handles him is that for the most part he barely shows up at all. Just a claw sliding under a door to drag away Mommy Longleg's body, a voice on the phone pretending to be a friendly helper named Ollie, or a silhouette lurking in a hallway that disappears the moment you get close. But really, he had just been watching you the whole time. And so by chapter 5, the pretense is gone. He pokes both Huggy Wuggy and Kissy Missy, then pursues the player aboard a moving tram by running along the tunnel walls faster than the vehicle itself, ramming his legs through the tram cars as he goes. Now, the player electrocutes him, burns him, and freezes him. But he survives all three because he's full of poppy gel, which makes him essentially unkillable by conventional means. So yeah, isn't he wonderful? Harley Sawyer. Most scientists want to be remembered for their discoveries. Harley Sawyer wanted to be remembered for everything, and he made sure of that by making everyone else's life considerably worse in the process. Sawyer was the head of special projects at Playtime Company and the architect of the Bigger Bodies Initiative, the program that turned orphan children into giant living toy monsters, which he proposed not out of any particular care for the company, but mostly to slash costs, avoid lawsuits, and quietly pursue his own research agenda. His public persona was measured and polite, the kind of man who sounds reasonable right up until you find out he engineered a species of human hybrid toys, specifically trained to eat whistleblowers. His real personality, once the mask came off, was that of an aggressively narcissistic perfectionist who screamed at co-workers and couldn't tolerate being helped. After his colleagues decided he was too dangerous to keep around in a human body, they had him converted into Experiment 1354, his brain, lungs, and liver kept alive inside a machine, watching everything through a single eye on a TV screen, which somehow made him more powerful, because from inside the factory's computer systems, he could now control every piece of technology in the building, including an army of android bodies he could possess and send at the player in Chapter 4's final confrontation. To actually finish him, the player has to destroy his organs one by one across the factory, lungs first, then liver, before finally ripping out his Omni-chip directly from his brain. His last words are, "You've saved no one," which turned out to be accurate since a backup copy of him quietly reactivated afterwards. Leith Pierre. The thing about Leith Pierre is that he was never the scientist, never the monster, and never the one pulling triggers. He was just the man who made all of it financially viable, which is, depending on your perspective, actually the most frightening thing about him. Leith was the head of innovation at Playtime Companies, effectively the COO, and the man who hired Harley Sawyer, greenlit the Bigger Bodies Initiative, and kept the whole machine running while maintaining the public image of a visionary toy executive who really deeply cared about making children happy. In reality, he was a violent and merciless leader who openly called his own employees idiots, threatened to have them removed for minor offenses, and according to one colleague, had witnesses to a major incident quietly killed because, as he put it, "We did what was necessary." When one employee named Rowan Stoll got too close to uncovering the truth about the experiments, Leith simply let Boxy Boo handle it. In the game, Leith never confronts the player directly. He exists entirely in VHS tapes, memos, and the factory's paper trail, a ghost of corporate rot that shaped everything and touched nothing. He also had a ban enacted to stop people from hiding behind doors to scare him, which is a very funny detail for a man who authorized the creation of child-eating monsters. His current whereabouts are unknown, and some fans believe he's still in the factory somewhere, watching. Boxy Boo. Before there was Huggy Wuggy, CatNap, or any of the franchise's more famous monsters, there was Boxy Boo, the proof of concept that the whole program was built on. He's a jack-in-the-box, all bright colors and springy limbs and a head that pops out of the top with a wide grin full of sharpened teeth, and he was Playtime Company's first successful Bigger Bodies experiment, specifically engineered to be fast, mobile, and hungry, with Dr. Sawyer personally making the call to attune his appetite to human flesh so he could quietly handle any employees who found out too much. In the game's multiplayer spin-off Project Playtime, players could actually control him, and his design makes terrifying mechanical sense because his entire movement kit is built around patience and surprise. He folds himself into the box, charges a leap, then launches across the entire map using that spring-loaded burst to cover distances and clear obstacles the other monsters can't, before grabbing survivors with his extending spring hands to drag them in. His first confirmed kill in the lore was a man who walked downstairs after making one too many recordings and simply never came back up, which is a very efficient way to run a cover-up. He's presumed dead after a 1997 toy war, but with this franchise, presumed is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Yarnaby. Originally, Yarnaby was a lion toy released as part of a wildlife conservation campaign in the 1970s, which is charming until you find out what Playtime company did to the orphan boy they turned into him. Quinn Navidson was a kid at Playcare who caught Harley Sawyer's attention for underperforming at the game station's tests in a way that suggested he was holding back. Sawyer confronted him directly, encouraged him to give his best effort on the next round, personally observed the results, and then had him converted into Experiment 1166 before isolating him from all human contact until Yarnaby's entire psychological world was built exclusively around Sawyer. When Sawyer was later forcibly removed from his post, Yarnaby stopped eating and just grieved, and when they were reunited after the Hour of Joy, that devotion turned him into one of Sawyer's most dangerous assets. In Chapter 4, the Doctor releases him as a free-roaming threat, and Yarnaby is genuinely difficult to deal with because he makes no sound while moving, uses his face, which splits vertically to reveal a second ring of broken teeth, as the primary threat, and stalks the player through the factory across multiple encounters until he finally chases them straight toward a vat of molten metal. He falls in. Harley Sawyer's response is to call him pathetic, which is kinda sad. Huggy Wuggy. If there's a face to this franchise, it's him. 18 feet of electric blue fur, 2 enormous yellow hands with Velcro pads, a smile's worth of needle-like teeth behind those oversized red lips, and a second jaw inside the first, like a moray eel wearing a mascot costume. For the first half of Chapter 1, Huggy just stands in the lobby with one arm raised in what the company called the welcome wave, and the game lets you walk right up to him, because the whole point is for the moment the power comes back on and he's gone to unsettle the player. What follows is one of horror gaming's better executed first pursuits. He stalks the player through the factory in silence, occasionally letting an arm slide out of a doorway before slithering back in, building dread before the actual chase begins. When it does, he's terrifyingly fast. He can run half a mile in 3 minutes and contort his body to fit through the same ventilation system the player is using as an escape route, mirroring their movements through the vents in real time. The player survives by dropping a crate on him at the catwalk, sending both of them plummeting into the factory depths, except Huggy survives the fall, bandages himself with whatever he can find, and shows back up in Chapter 5 having apparently fixed himself over the course of a decade, which is either impressive or deeply unsettling depending on how you look at it. CatNap. His toy got recalled in 1989 because the plush versions were accidentally emitting a real sedative gas instead of lavender, giving children across the country violent nightmares, and that was before anyone knew there was a giant living version of him walking around Playcare putting orphans to sleep for experimentation purposes. CatNap is a 12-foot purple feline with an emaciated ribcage visible through his fur, elongated limbs loosely stitched at the joints, and a mouth that stays permanently open, just a void, no visible teeth, just darkness. Inside his esophagus is a gas delivery apparatus filled with the red smoke, a hallucinogenic sedative he can exhale at will, and the game uses this as a full chapter-length mechanic. The red smoke doesn't just knock the player out, it makes the world look different while it's happening, warping Home Sweet Home into a labyrinthine nightmare version of itself while CatNap lurks in the shadows. He stalks the player across multiple encounters through Chapter 3, appearing and disappearing without engaging directly, building tension before the boss fight where the player has to overcharge a grab pack receiver while fending him off for nearly 5 minutes of close calls. The wing condition is electrocuting him, which ignites the red smoke still inside his body and sets him from the inside out. He kneels before the prototype anyway. Mommy Longlegs. The name is a pun on the spider Daddy Longlegs, which tells you everything you need to know about the energy Playtime company brought to naming their experiments. Mommy Longlegs is tall, slender, pink, and spider-like, with arms that stretch hundreds of feet and a design that started as a toy meant to show off new elastic plastic, until the orphan inside her, Marie Payne, retained enough of herself to turn the game station into something considerably more dangerous than a children's game show. Chapter 2's structure is built entirely around her as the host, She forces the player through 3 rigged minigames, offering pieces of the train code as prizes while doing everything she can to ensure they don't survive the attempt, including cutting the ropes, holding back the mini Huggies, and letting Bunzo descend faster with every wrong answer. When the player keeps winning anyway, the friendliness dissolves in stages, first thinning, then cracking, then gone entirely. And the final chase sees her counting down from 10, stretching her arms ahead of the player to block escape routes while she closes in from behind. She doesn't lose on purpose. She gets her hand stuck in a grinder and in a reckless frenzy to break free, ends up pulling herself in, screaming that the prototype will make her part of him, which he does. Her arm shows up attached to his body in Chapter 5. Miss Delight. She was a teacher before any of this, and her subject was anatomy, which in retrospect explains quite a lot. Miss Delight was one of 8 identical teacher dolls assigned to Playcare's school, each one responsible for a different subject, all viewing each other as sisters, until CatNap locked them inside after the hour of joy with no food, and 10 years of hunger, isolation, and paranoia did the rest. She built a weapon out of pencils and twine, named it Bob, started treating it as a real person, and used the technique Bob taught her, standing completely still until her sisters assumed she was dead, to pick them off one by one. This is also exactly how she hunts the player in Chapter 3. Miss Delight doesn't move when you're looking at her. She freezes completely, like a doll, like she's dead, and only advances the moment you turn your back, which means the entire school section is a prolonged exercise in deciding how long you can afford to look away. When she finally drops the act and charges, the player has one chance to pull a lever and let a metal gate do what a decade of starvation and surviving her sisters couldn't. Her real teeth, visible through the damage to her broken face, aren't the ones on her intact outer shell. She either lost her false teeth fighting her sisters, or removed them herself to make eating easier. Mini Huggies. If Huggy Wuggy is the terrifying version, the mini Huggies are the terrible version. Smaller, faster, and considerably more numerous, which is its own kind of problem. They come in green, red, blue, and yellow, suggesting Playtime Company felt the answer to one nightmare was a full crayon box of them, and they appear in 2 very different contexts across the game that show you exactly how adaptable the concept is. In Chapter 2's Wuggy minigame, they're restrained inside holes in the walls, 18 holes, and the player has to use the grab pack to smack them back in whenever they start growling, shaking, and leaning out, because if they make it through, they get rid of the player. The strings that were holding them back, Mommy Longlegs cheerfully informs you, are now gone. By Chapter 4, the same creatures are running loose through the prison in feral packs, lunging at the player and only retreating when hit with flares from the flare hand. A significantly less structured encounter, but arguably worse because there's no game show framing making it feel contained. One of them, Experiment 1391, is a specific girl named Cassie. Wuggies. The Wuggies were the mini Huggies of Project Playtime, the multiplayer spin-off where Leith Pierre was sending extraction teams into the factory, and they operated as the world's most colorful sewer obstacle. They came in 7 colors, including pink variants modeled after Kissy Missy rather than Huggy Wuggy, and when a specialist fell into the feeding pit, they'd crawl out of the sewer pipes in numbers to finish the job. The same grab pack whack-away mechanic as Wuggy, except you're in a pit and they keep coming. Unlike the mini Huggies who keep their mouths closed, the Wuggies kept their mouths permanently open, which is either a design choice or a mission statement. They were eventually removed from the game entirely after players started using them as camping tools, which is a very normal sentence about miniature versions of a child-eating monster, and speaks to the kind of creative problem-solving the player base brought to a game about surviving a haunted toy factory. Ruined critters. The smiling critters were designed to be cheerful and wholesome, little plush animals with wide smiles and zipper pendants, and the ruined critters are what happens when those same toys spend a decade abandoned in a dark playhouse with no food, rotting from the outside in. Their voice boxes broke somewhere along the way, so the childlike laughter they still emit is distorted now and pitched wrong. In Chapter 3's Playhouse, they flood out of holes in the walls the moment the player takes a step inside, crawling in coordinated packs and retreating backward without ever breaking eye contact when the player fires flares, only to reappear from another direction. Their most memorable trick is what they do when they get inside Dog Day, literally climbing in through his wounds and eye socket, reanimating his body from within, and using it as an armored vehicle to chase the player through the tunnels, because the flares that worked on them alone don't penetrate a bigger body's skin. They are the smallest experiments in the game, but they are still, for many players, the most memorable thing in Chapter 3. Bubba Chops. She's the leader of the Nightmare Critters, which is exactly the kind of band name you'd expect from a gang of toy monsters, and she earned the position largely by being the one dark-walled sheep in a toy line full of vibrant colors, a built-in camouflage in a factory where the lights are mostly broken. Barber Chops is an anthropomorphic black-wooled sheep with a stark white face, hooves, and a skull pendant around her neck, and her defining trait is introversion, described as a loner who has to be coaxed out of her house by her friends and usually regresses by the next day. In Chapter 4, the mini Barber Chops plushies appear as part of the horde enemies the player faces across the shelf and the prison, retreating only when hit with flares alongside the other nightmare critters. Her bigger body form gets its own dedicated encounter. The doctor drops the player into a holding area and releases her to chase them through it, where she bleats and screams while hunting until the player reroutes the power and escapes through a side door. Pianosaurus. He was labeled a failure by Harley Sawyer before he ever got a proper chance. Declared a mindless invalid with no human qualities remaining, sentenced to testing, and then somehow survived 15 years in that factory anyway, which would feel triumphant if the ending weren't what it is. Pianosaurus is a bipedal dinosaur with piano keys for teeth, multicolored claws and horns, a stegosaurus spine, and an ankylosaurus club on his tail, which is a genuinely wonderful design for a creature Sawyer immediately wrote off and forgot about. The thing about Pianosaurus that makes him so compelling is that he wasn't violent. He saw the world as a child's crayon drawing, colorful and friendly and full of concert venues, and every act of destruction he caused was just him trying to ask someone to join the band. In Chapter 4, the player crosses a ledge over his enclosure and slips, landing in front of him, and he rushes toward them not to attack but to invite them to perform, except from the player's perspective, it looks exactly like a charge. Before he gets close, Doughy the Doman grabs him from the darkness, smashes him against the walls a few times, and eats him alive, all while Pianosaurus sings one final out-of-tune chord. He has approximately 22 seconds of screen time in the main game. His case is definitely tragic, and people have actually created hashtags for him. Bunzo Bunny. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And if you keep making mistakes in the musical memory test, those symbols are going to tell you exactly how Mommy Longlegs' hospitality actually works. Bunzo Bunny is a yellow rabbit in green overalls and a party hat, perpetually grinning, holding a pair of golden cymbals, and as a bigger body, his mouth splits open into a row of jagged fangs, which the toy version does not advertise on the box. His mechanic in Chapter 2 is elegantly horrible. He's suspended from the ceiling by a cable and slowly descends each time the player gets a sequence wrong in the musical memory game, crashing his cymbals faster and louder the closer he gets, so the noise of his approach is both the warning and the timer. If the player fails completely, he drops and kills them. Mommy Longlegs kills him anyway after the game ends for not finishing the job. His body ends up strung from the game station ceiling by her webs, which the player can find on the way out if they look up. The Easter comic the developers released about him ends with Bunzo trapped at the bottom of a pit, calling for help that never comes, drawing pictures to document the passing days until he runs out of days to count. His jolly nature, the lore notes, was likely covering up a sadder side. Based on available evidence, yes. PJ Pug-a-Pillar. The name tells you almost everything. He's a pug crossed with a caterpillar, a long segmented body of pink and magenta wool, a grinning dog face with a lolling tongue, and dozens of little limbs along his sides, each ending in a tiny jester's shoe. His role in the statue's minigame is to chase the player at a perfectly calibrated speed, not fast enough to catch them immediately, but with a dynamic that adjusts in real time based on distance, speeding up when they're far and slowing when they're close, which is just suspenseful for anyone playing the game. He doesn't rely on sight at all, which an orphan girl named Jane figured out after just 2 visits to the game station. She simply gave him something else to follow, and he followed that instead. Sawyer noted her observational ability and immediately made her the subject of a different experiment, which is the most Sawyer thing imaginable. What's notable about PJ's chapter ending is that Mommy Longlegs kills both Bunzo and the mini Huggies for failing her. But she doesn't kill PJ, he just wanders back into the factory. Lily Lovebraids. She would very much like to have you over for tea, and the first thing she does when she finds you is wrap her hair around your body and physically carry you to her dollhouse. Lily Lovebraids is a ball-jointed doll with 3 long purple braids that end in gnarled claws, teeth and eyes that glow green in the dark, and the habit of conducting full conversations with a candy cat head she uses to voice her own doubts back at herself. You see, the person inside her is Gracie Green, a counselor who ran the conditioning program that brainwashed the other experiments, who was then taken by those same experiments during the hour of joy, surgically transformed into Lily, and subjected to her own conditioning until she forgot she'd ever been anyone else. She keeps her former skeleton in a bedroom in the dollhouse, dressed in jewelry and flowers, convinced it's a woman named Ms. Gracie who was kind to her. Chapter 5 structures her as a slow burn threat, She assigns tasks, plays host, runs a green light/red light game through her darkened dollhouse, using her humming as the signal, and gives the impression of control up until the moment the tea party goes sideways and she decides everyone at the table is going into the bad toy box. Her final chase has her hair lashing out ahead of the player to block the path while she closes in from behind, which is the same basic design as Mommy Longleg's final run and works just as well. However, she falls to her ending when the platform gives way beneath her. A nearby cardboard cutout informs the player that hair keeps growing even after you die, but when you check for her body, it's gone, which is honestly just really creepy. If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.